Imagine stepping off a plane in absolute paradise, right? You're expecting that classic luxury brochure experience, overwater bungalows, unlimited cocktails, a flawless ocean
Oh,
breeze.
the absolute dream.
Exactly. But then you realize your dream destination, well, it relies on wild goats for landscaping, has feral chickens just roaming the beaches, and boasts a cost of living that makes Paris look like, a bargain bin.
Yeah, it really shatters that illusion pretty quickly. I mean, we're so conditioned to view these islands purely as backdrops for our relaxation,
Right.
and we completely overlook the massive, just the sheer logistical and cultural machinery required to keep them running day to day.
It's so true. And if you are an Irish couple right now, currently up to your eyeballs in planning that once-in-a-lifetime Pacific Island vacation, welcome. We are tailoring this deep dive specifically for you today.
We really are.
We want to completely shortcut your planning process because we have this massive treasure trove of field notes from a Dublin couple who go by Art and Archie on their travel blog, JustRetired50Plus.
Yeah, they just took a 21-day trip across the Pacific in March of 2026, and I mean, they documented everything.
Everything. And the scope of their journey is just fantastic. They started with a 4-day on-the-ground stay in Tahiti and then followed that up with a 17-day voyage on the Seven Seas Navigator.
But what makes their note so incredibly valuable is their underlying mission. They weren't just out there reviewing the resort buffets.
No, they had a secret agenda. They secretly evaluated each and every stop as a potential retirement destination.
Which completely changes how you look at a place.
Exactly. So instead of a glossy marketing pitch, we are getting this really unvarnished, behind-the-scenes look at the daily reality of these islands.
Right, because before they left Dublin, they had an AI trip planner generate a standard itinerary of, what to expect across French Polynesia, Samoa, Fiji, and New Zealand.
And our goal today is to look at the staggering contrast between those glossy AI predictions and the actual lived experience.
Well, let's jump right into the starting point for almost every Pacific dream vacation, which is Tahiti.
Right, the gateway.
Exactly. Now, the AI generated a standard luxury profile, suggesting this fabulous 4-day immersion in a tropical economic powerhouse.
But the reality Art and Archie found was, well, it led them to conclude that Tahiti is a city to transit through, not really a place to spend your hard-earned vacation days.
Yeah, and to understand why, you really have to look at the sheer weight Tahiti carries for the rest of French Polynesia. It handles, what, 85 to 90% of the entire Society Islands population.
85 to 90% just on one island.
It's massive. It's the administrative capital, and its economy is propped up by these massive subsidies from France,
Right.
which utterly distorts the local cost of living. They found that everyday prices in Tahiti are 30 to 40% higher than in Paris.
Which is wild to think about. And for you guys listening, flying out of Dublin, you really have to factor in the extreme geography here.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Tahiti sits roughly 15,000 kilometers from Europe. Every single car, every drop of fuel, every smartphone, every box of cereal, it all has to be shipped or flown across the world.
Yeah, and when that imported box of cereal finally lands, it gets hit with massive import taxes. Local businesses that actually exist there.
And then you add in the fact that many of the locals are working these public sector jobs that pay high French standard wages.
Yeah.
So you create this economic environment where a simple grocery run feels like a luxury purchase.
It really does. Which begs the question of how the locals who aren't on those high government salaries actually survive. Because they certainly aren't paying resort prices or, eating imported European beef.
Right, so how do they do it?
Well, Art and Archie's notes break down the local survival strategy perfectly. It revolves almost entirely around multi-generational living and basically opting out of the imported economy.
Making sense.
Yeah, families share housing and transport costs among several generations under one roof. And instead of going to the supermarket, they rely on the ocean.
Right, the fishing.
Yeah, they fish for tuna and mahi-mahi to make poisson cru, which is that amazing traditional raw fish cured in lime juice and coconut milk.
Oh, that sounds incredible. And when they do eat out, they bypass those expensive brick-and-mortar restaurants entirely, right?
Exactly. They head straight to the roulottes.
The roulottes. These are the food trucks down by the waterfront, right?
Yeah, serving huge, cheap portions of chow mein and crepes. It's this incredibly vibrant collision of Chinese, Polynesian and French culinary influences.
I'd love to try that. But, outside of those vibrant community pockets, the sheer cost of existing in Tahiti creates this glaring issue that tourists rarely anticipate.
Yeah,
Visible street homelessness in the capital city of Papeete.
the contrast is just jarring. I mean, in a territory with a total population of only around 280,000, the concentration of unhoused people in the capital is really significant.
And the sources attribute this to kind of a perfect storm of social pressures, right?
Yeah, you have extreme housing costs driven by strict French building codes and expensive imported materials. And simultaneously, there is this constant migration of people from the remote outer islands coming to Tahiti in search of jobs.
And advanced healthcare, I imagine.
Exactly. And the public housing infrastructure simply hasn't kept pace with that inward migration at all.
So when you mix that housing shortage with the breakdown of traditional extended family support networks, because, people are leaving their ancestral lands to move to the city,
Yeah.
and then you introduce a growing local methamphetamine problem, which they call ICE, and the whole romanticized image of Tahiti really fractures.
It does.
It reminds me of, like, an exclusive nightclub with a really hefty cover charge. Once you finally get inside, you realize the drinks are watered down, the atmosphere is tense, and honestly, even the locals can't afford to be there.
That is a perfect analogy. Tahiti is essentially the velvet rope you have to pass through to access the more authentic rooms in the back, right?
Because once Art and Archie left Papeete, their perspective shifted completely. They traveled to the neighboring islands of Moorea and Raiatea, which operate on entirely different economic and cultural wavelengths.
Let's talk about Moorea first. It's just a short, 30-minute fast ferry from Tahiti.
Super close.
Yeah, making it a viable commuter island for people working in the capital.
Yeah.
But the pace is completely dialed back. It's famous for its pineapple plantations and its heart-shaped geography.
Oh, it's stunning.
But what really stood out to me in the notes is how Moorea's economy relies on microtourism.
Yes.
Like, instead of massive impersonal resort excursions, the local economy is driven by small family-run operations, taking, maybe half a dozen people out on a boat to snorkel with stingrays and blacktip reef sharks.
It's so much more intimate and sustainable. And then you have Raiatea, which the sources highlight as the sacred island.
The sacred island.
Yeah. Culturally, it is revered as the birthplace of the Polynesian gods and the historical launching point for all the great migrations across the Pacific.
And practically speaking, it is wonderfully remote. The population hovers around 12 to 13,000 people.
Yeah.
And because the community is so small and interconnected, everyone is either related or a lifelong neighbor, crime is virtually non-existent.
Okay, hold on. Because I'm trying to square this tranquil, sacred island image with some of the wilder details in these field notes.
I know where you're going with this.
Right. Art and Archie specifically mention feral chickens just roaming everywhere and goats acting as the local municipal lawnmowers.
Yes, the goats.
I mean, that paints a picture of a chaotic farm, not exactly a serene five-star luxury escape. How does this fit into the glossy Polynesian dream we were always sold?
Well, it really just comes down to the mechanics of island ecology and, honestly, necessity. Raiatea is isolated, which means bringing in heavy landscaping equipment, and the fuel to run it is prohibitively expensive.
That makes sense.
So they use goats as eco-landscapers. The goats efficiently control invasive plant species that were introduced to the island decades ago, and they do the job quietly and without relying on imported diesel.
Okay, I get the goats, but what about the chickens?
The chickens. The chickens are a pervasive reality across the entire Pacific. Humans introduced them to these islands generations ago. The climate is warm year-round, so they don't even require shelter.
Right, and they just forage.
Exactly. They have endless supply of insects and fallen fruit to eat. But, crucially, these islands have zero natural predators.
No foxes or anything.
Exactly. No foxes, no coyotes, no large predatory mammals. So the chickens just multiply and roam freely through the resorts, the towns, the forests.
What the funniest detail from the Dublin couple's notes is that despite having free-range chickens literally everywhere, the islanders don't even eat them.
No, they don't. The feral chickens are apparently far too tough and gamey.
And I imagine tracking down their eggs in the dense jungle is basically impossible.
Oh, absolutely. So Raiatea actually relies on 2 commercial enclosed egg farms to supply the local markets.
That is such a brilliant contradiction. An island overrun with chickens that still has to farm them commercially.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they apply that same pragmatism to their waste management. Because they don't have the land mass for massive landfills, Their recycling program is incredibly rigorous.
Oh, right.
They stockpile glass and plastic for weeks and then ship it entirely off the island back to Papeete for processing.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're even reviving the use of natural broadleaf plates for food service just to systematically cut down on single-use plastics.
Which I guess protects their true economic lifeblood. Because Raitea isn't leaning entirely on tourists, right? They have a thriving black pearl industry.
Yes, they host 5 government-approved pearl farms that utilize really meticulous Japanese cultivation methods.
It's fascinating. Instead of just diving for random oysters hoping to get lucky, technicians surgically graft a tiny piece of mantle tissue and a bead into an oyster. And then they just wait years for the oyster to coat it in nacre to produce those famous indigenous black pearls.
Such a delicate process. They also harvest the local noni tree berry, which has driven a whole secondary economy of natural remedies and health supplements that are, credited with boosting the islanders' longevity.
So this creates a really fascinating baseline for our comparison, because French Polynesia, for all its beauty, is tightly bound to French subsidies, high costs, and European regulations.
Right.
But as Art and Archie's cruise ship sails westward, leaving the Society Islands behind, they cross into independent nations.
Which is where we see what the Pacific looks like when it isn't tethered to a European economy.
Exactly. And just as a quick transition, Bora Bora shows us what happens when a military outpost transforms into the ultimate capitalist luxury brand.
Oh, the World War II connection.
Yeah. The field notes point out that Bora Bora's fame actually originated during the war when the U.S. stationed about 5,000 troops there. It was a non-combat zone, so these soldiers basically just hung out in paradise. And when they went home, they hyped it up to anyone who would listen. The whole Bora Bora luxury mythos essentially started as word of mouth from bored GIs.
That is hilarious. But, what happens when you strip all that foreign money and influence away? That brings us to Samoa, which operates on a completely different cultural frequency.
Tell me about Samoa.
Well, Samoa is deeply traditional. The population is over 95% Polynesian, and the economic shift is just dramatic. The couple estimated a very comfortable living could be maintained on roughly $1,000 a month.
$1,000 a month? That's amazing.
It is. But the most profound difference lies in the concept of property. In the West, or, in heavily regulated French Polynesia, real estate is a commercial commodity.
Right, you buy and sell it.
But in Samoa, land is customary. It belongs to the extended family lineage, not an individual, and it cannot simply be bought or sold on the open market.
See, for an Irish couple used to browsing property listings online, that's a massive paradigm shift. You don't just buy a house in Samoa, you integrate into a lineage.
Exactly. And that ancestral connection changes everything about the daily landscape.
Huh.
Because the land is the permanent anchor of the family, there are no municipal graveyards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, families simply bury their ancestors right in the front yards of their homes. You are literally, geographically, living with your history.
That is so powerful. Now, from that deep ancestral homogeneity of Samoa, the itinerary moves to Fiji, offering yet another striking contrast.
Fiji is so interesting. It's a really vibrant multicultural hub. About 35 to 40% of the population is Indo-Fijian.
Right, and this demographic makeup is a direct result of British colonial history.
Yes.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the British brought over indentured laborers from India to work the massive sugarcane plantations.
Yeah, and Fiji eventually gained its independence from the UK in 1970, but that deep blend of indigenous Fijian and Indian culture is woven into everything from the food to the local politics.
And you still see the colonial echoes everywhere, like the main coastal roads being officially named the King's Highway and the Queen's Highway.
Yet at the same time, Fiji is incredibly forward-looking regarding its infrastructure. Unlike the French islands that rely heavily on imported oil to keep the lights on, Fiji runs a massive portion of its grid on renewable energy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, specifically hydro and biomass, alongside growing solar and wind projects. By generating their own power, they drastically lower the baseline cost of living and insulate themselves from global shipping fluctuations.
That is so smart. Now, since we are diving into the history of these independent nations, it's worth noting how Art and Archie's field notes handle, well, the historical elephant in the room, cannibalism.
Right, it's a topic that always comes up in European texts about the Pacific.
The historical texts they reviewed point out that while cannibalism did exist across some of these islands, historically usually tied strictly to warfare, displays of dominance, or highly specific religious rituals, The practice was completely eradicated by the mid-1800s.
Yeah. And the crucial takeaway from their research is how European explorers and early missionaries systematically exaggerated these accounts.
It sounds like the early European accounts were basically the 19th century version of clickbait.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was.
They exaggerated the danger and sensationalized the gore specifically to get funding, military support, and attention from back home in London or Paris, completely misrepresenting these complex indigenous cultures in the process.
It was a calculated narrative tool used to justify colonization. Understanding how that history was weaponized is so vital when you are moving through these spaces today and interacting with the descendants of those cultures.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of Art and Archie's 21-day deep dive.
The big reveal.
Yes. Having experienced the full spectrum, from the subsidized French luxury of Tahiti to the ancestral roots of Samoa to the multicultural, renewable-powered engine of Fiji, they sat down to answer their primary mission. Where is the best place for a European couple to actually retire?
And their evaluation criteria prioritized long-term livability over short-term aesthetics. They focused on the daily cost of living, the quality and accessibility of healthcare, the bureaucratic reality of securing a visa, and the established infrastructure for an expat community.
Let's break down their tiers. In Tier C, the dropouts, we have Tahiti and Bora Bora.
Makes sense based on what we've discussed.
Yeah, the verdict here is pretty simple. They are incredible for a short, well-funded holiday, but logistically completely impractical for retirement. They are wildly expensive, deeply dependent on long global supply chains, and completely lack a cohesive, long-term community infrastructure for expats.
Right. So moving up to Tier B, the compromises. This includes Samoa, Raiatea, and Moorea.
Okay.
Samoa offers incredible cultural richness and very low costs, as we mentioned, but its isolation and limited advanced healthcare facilities make it a real risk for retirees.
That's a huge factor as you get older.
Definitely. And Raiatea and Moorea offer that authentic, safe Polynesian dream, but they're still tethered to the high baseline costs of French Polynesia and remain painfully far from family back in Europe.
Which brings us to Tier A, the absolute winners. Taking the undisputed crown for the best overall balance is Fiji.
Fiji.
The mechanics of living there just work. The cost of living hovers around $1,800 to $2,100 a month. It is English-speaking, making the transition seamless. It has a thriving expat ecosystem. But the biggest factor, visa accessibility.
This is huge. Fiji has structured its bureaucracy to welcome foreign capital. They offer a specific assured income visa designed precisely for retirees.
Wow, that's incredibly convenient.
Yeah, if you can prove a guaranteed pension or passive income stream, the government provides a streamlined legal path to residency. You get to skip all the administrative nightmares you find in other territories. It's the singular place on the itinerary that combines tropical livability, genuine affordability, and a welcoming legal framework.
But the Dublin couple did outline a runner-up for the more cautious planner. Northland, New Zealand, specifically the Bay of Islands area.
New Zealand is gorgeous.
Geographically stunning. And the Northland region has a high Maori population, around 30 to 35%, so you are still deeply immersed in Polynesian culture.
Right.
The major trade-off is the cost. It is significantly more expensive than Fiji, and the visa rules for European citizens without highly specialized skills are notoriously strict.
But the trade-off for those strict visas and higher costs is incredible systemic stability.
Absolutely.
If top-tier Western healthcare, political predictability, and robust infrastructure are your absolute non-negotiables as you age, New Zealand is the ultimate sensible choice for European retirees.
You know, looking at their final rankings, it highlights a fascinating paradox.
What's that?
Is the perfect exotic vacation spot inherently the worst place to actually try and build a daily life?
That's a great point.
It seems like the very things that make a place an incredible escape, the extreme isolation, the reliance on luxury imports, the untouched landscapes, are the exact same factors that make grocery shopping, finding a specialist doctor, or simply paying your monthly rent an absolute nightmare. Paradise, it seems, works best when you have a return ticket.
That is the ultimate lesson from their field notes.
Yeah.
The infrastructure of a vacation is entirely different from the infrastructure of a life.
So true. So what does this all mean for you, our Irish couple listening right now, finalizing your itinerary? The definitive blueprint based on Art and Archie's adventure is this. Use a cruise to sample these diverse islands safely and comfortably without packing and unpacking a dozen times.
A great strategy.
When mapping out your land days, skip spending expended time in Tahiti, use it as a transit hub, and get straight out to Moorea or Raiate for the real French Polynesian experience.
Highly recommend.
And if you find yourself sitting on a beach, falling so deeply in love with the Pacific that you never want to fly back to Dublin, set your sights on Fiji or New Zealand for the long haul.
As you pack your bags and finalize those bookings, I would leave you with this final thought to mull over. When you finally step onto the sand, look past the brochure,
Mm-hmm.
think about the immense logistical web required to manifest that seamless week in paradise. Consider the fuel shipped across oceans, the local ecosystems managed by grazing goats, and the complex economies operating just out of sight of the resorts. How might understanding the true hidden costs of your luxury change the way you interact with the locals who call your temporary escape their permanent home?
Because once you realize how much effort goes into maintaining the illusion, the reality of the islands becomes infinitely more beautiful. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Go book those excursions, enjoy every single second of your Pacific adventure, and we will catch you next time.